بداية أنا بعتذر عن اللي صار امبارح لأنه كان في عندي misunderstanding للتيبل، كان مؤرخ بتاريخ 14 إنه بلش، فعديت الأيام أنا طلع معي 16 اللي هو اليوم أول محاضرة، فكان في مشكلة بالتواريخ اللي مسجل على التيبل. anyways هاي المحاضرة الأولى رح ناخدها الآن من 9 ل 10، وفي عندنا محاضرة ثانية من 12 ل1. and we just have 2 lectures that will talk about the biochemical topics that are related to the MSS module. ورح نحاول نغطي بعض الأشياء اللي فاتتنا بالأسي اللي كانت موجودة بالendocrine system. We have the same approach when we talk about diagnosis. So here we go. الليزر ظاهر يا جماعة عندكم هذا؟
ظاهر دكتور.
تمام thank you. طيب نفس المشكلة دائما، الحضور متواضع. وحمزة هو السي ار تبعكم؟
ايه دكتور.
صباح الخير. طيب موضوعنا اليوم سهل جدا من ناحية biochemical issues. السبب في ذلك إنه we will focus on certain important topics rather than talking about a lot of details that we should have or that we should discuss when we talk about biochemistry or molecular biology of anything that is related to the medical field. So basically we are going to concentrate or to talk about the biochemical structure of the bone as a tissue and the types of the collagen that are forming or that are playing an important structure in the bone, as well as the non-organic components of the bone, which is composed of what's called hydroxyapatite cement, which is causing the rigid structure or tough structure of the bone. So this is the reference book that you can go back and actually pick certain subtitles from there, because the chapter is very long chapter talking about what's called extracellular matrix, which means that it's not only talking about the bone, it will talk about, or it talks about many other things that are related to the extracellular matrix, and the bone is one of them as a texture. So these are the expected outcomes, or actually the objectives of this lecture. You have to describe the structure of the hydroxyapatite, which is very simple structure and very easy to remember. And the most difficult thing I think is the matrix proteins. هلا كلمة difficult things أو most difficult things مش معناها إنه الموضوع صعب، بس هذا أصعب إشي، بمعنى آخر إنه كلهم سهلين ولكن هذا أصعب السهل فيما يتعلق بالبون structure. And then we will talk about how the bone is going to be calcified from a simple point of view. And then we'll talk about the biological or medical importance or clinical importance of the certain parameters like alkaline phosphatase, as well as calcium, phosphate, and vitamin D. And if we have a chance, we will review the calcium and phosphate homeostasis. And I think this topic is covered in the physiology part, how the body is going to control or make a balance between the calcium and phosphate in the body, because it's subjected to hormone control. So the bone itself is known as mineralized connective tissue. So basically it's a tissue with minerals, and these minerals are accumulated in that tissue in order to have this rigid structure, in order to have enough support to the body. So again, from the biochemical point of view, the bone consists of 2 major components. The first one, or the first component of the bone, is the organic matter, which is mainly proteins that we have in the bone. And the second component is the inorganic or mineral components of the bone. So we have 2 major components that are forming the bone, and the cells that are making the bone are responsible for the coordinating of these components. I mean, production of the proteins, the required proteins, and specific proteins that are required for bone formation, as well as the mineralization process, how the minerals are going to be deposited in order to have the mineral structure of the bone. So this table actually summarizes the major proteins that could be found in the bone, and these are the comments about each of these types, and we will focus on certain comments. So basically we have two types or two major proteins that can form the bone structure, which are collagens and non-collagen proteins. Okay, so they have been classified according to the basic structure or the basic component of these proteins, whether they belong to the collagens or not. So the major type of collagen that we could find in the bone is type 1, and it represents likely or like more than 90% of the total proteins that we have in the bone. That's why this protein is classified as a major one. عشان هيك هو تصنف انه في عندنا من البروتينات الكولاجين او النون كولاجين، لانه هو بيمثل اكثر من 90% من الكومبوننت الموجوده في البون. هلا لما بحكي انا كولاجين تايب 1، هذا بيعتمد على الالفا تشينز الموجودين في الكولاجين. If you remember when we talked about collagen, and let me just have something to remind you, we have these alpha chains that are forming, and we changed the color by the way in order to have clear vision. So we have these chains that are forming alpha chains of the bone, okay, and known as collagen. So each of these is a polypeptide chain, and they are conjugated together in order to form what's called the triple chains that are representing the basic unit for the formation of the collagen. So in the next step you will have another 3 chains. Okay, and we have cross linkage here, and we have also 3 more chains. هم tripeptides بنسميهم. Okay, as well as here. And finally, after making the cross linkage, we have this, أنا بدي أرسمه على شكل fiber. Okay, fiber or fibril basically of collagen. Okay, so this fiber of collagen composed of these triple chains of alpha helix or alpha chains. بلاش نسميهم هيليكس لأن بعض الكتب بتسميهم هيليكس، بس هم مش هيليكال ستراكشر. هلا هذول التشينز اللي هون ممكن يكونوا type 1, type 2, type 3 depending on the sequence of amino acids that we have in each of these chains. وبالتالي كلمة معنى إنه في عندي alpha 1 or alpha 2 إنه في عندي different chains inside this type of collagen. So this collagen consists of these types of alpha chains اللي هم خاصين بالcollagen type 1. As a supporting collagen, we have collagen type 5 as well, but it represents minor component of the bone structure. So basically, collagen type 1 is the major type of collagen that we could find in the bone. هلا الاشكاليه اللي راح تصير الان هي مش اشكاليه، ما بحبش استخدم هذا المصطلح، ولكن the new thing that you could learn here is the non-collagen proteins that are very important for the formation of the bone itself. هلا هذول البروتينز كيف عرفناهم؟ by the analysis of the components of the bone we can actually detect or measure each of these components. هلا basically بما انه هو عباره عن living tissue, we have plasma proteins because we have blood vessels over there, and the blood flow will result in the formation of the plasma. So we have plasma proteins, which is a mixture of plasma proteins that you could find in the plasma of the blood. So they are very similar. هلا الاشياء المهمه الاخرى اللي ممكن تكون جزء منها very specific for the bone structure are these things. So we have what's called proteoglycans, and they are very different from what's known as glycoproteins. Proteoglycans means we have proteins that are conjugated with carbohydrates, and they are called proteoglycans. طيب ما هو الجلايكوبروتينز كمان عبارة عن proteins conjugated with carbohydrates. The difference here is the constitution of the proteoglycan. We have a lot of carbohydrates that are conjugated with the protein in a certain manner in order to form this structure of proteoglycan. So we have a huge component of carbohydrates compared to the glycoproteins. الجلايكوبروتينز ميزتها انه هي عباره عن structures. Let me draw that. عباره عن protein structure here, and you could find, for example, on this protein, small branch of carbohydrate. Okay, and this will be called the glycoprotein. While the story here is different in the proteoglycan, and we will describe this in the next few slides. Okay, so and examples of these proteoglycan, these types of proteoglycan type 1, type 2, type 3, and you can see here the CS abbreviation, which represents or which is the abbreviation of the chondroitin sulfate structure. Chondroitin sulfate structure is the type of the carbohydrate that we have in these proteoglycans. So these proteoglycan proteins, they contain what's called glycoacyl or GAG proteins اللي هو glucose aminoglycan structures or glucose aminoglycan components. So we have what's called the glucose aminoglycan molecules that are enriching these proteoglycans, and these types, or because this is a family of proteins, can be classified or can be described as the following. We have what's called hyaluronic acid, for example, chondroitin sulfate, keratin sulfate, type 1, type 2, heparin, heparan sulfate, dermatan sulfate. هذول المولكيولز كلهم معروفين باسم الجاجز أو glucose aminoglycan molecules, and they are the major component of the proteoglycan proteins. As you can see, the first two types are non-bone specific. هلا واحد منهم معروف باسم مختصر اللي هو biglycan, and the other one is the dicorine, and they are not bone specific. It means that they can be found in other tissues. ليش بنركز على كلمة bone specific و bone non specific؟ اللي هو المثال الثالث أو النوع الثالث من البروتيوغلايكان is bone specific proteoglycan. It's only found in the bone, so we can use it as a marker in the future. The other component of non-collagen protein is known as osteonectin, and it's responsible for connection inside the bone structure. So, and again, because it's responsible for the connection between certain extracellular matrix proteins, it's non-specific for the bone, so it's not bone-specific marker. And here you have to focus on the bone-specific markers. الباقيين راح يكونوا not specific or non-bone specific markers. The other protein that you could find in the bone structure as a protein component اللي هو osteocalcin, as well as osteopontin, sialoprotein, and BMS اللي هو bone morphogenetic protein, as well as the osteoproteogreen protein. These are the major components of the protein rather than the proteoglycan proteins. So you can classify them either to be proteoglycan or non-proteoglycan as well, اللي هم كلهم تابعين لمجموعة اسمها non-collagen proteins. هلا again, these components are very important components اللي بنركز عليهم اللي هو osteocalcin. Okay. هلا osteocalcin contains what's called gamma carboxyglutamate residues rich with gamma carboxyglutamate residues, and it's bone specific protein, and this is very important. The osteopontin is not bone specific protein, and it's a glycosylated protein as well as phosphorylated one. The sialoprotein is also another example of bone specific protein, and this family of what's called bone morphogenic proteins is a family of more than 8 components or 8 types of these proteins, and they have different functions, and they are saying it's responsible for the ectopic bone growth. The last one is responsible for a strange mechanism, which is the inhibition of the calcitogenesis. Osteocalcitogenesis اللي هو formation of the osteoclast cells. So it's kind of regulatory protein in the bone structure. هلا كل متذكر هون انه حكينا عن ايش اسمه بروتوغلايكان، قلنا راح نميزهم عن الجلايكوبروتيز. هلا البروتوغلايكان structure consists of this core protein, and this core protein is conjugated with these branches of carbohydrate molecules. ومنلاحظ هون الكربوهيدرات molecules are so many in this protein structure, and that's why they are different from glycoprotein. So this is a glycoprotein and this is protoglycan structure because it consists of much more carbohydrate molecules. هلا قلنا البروتوغلايكان هذول مكونين من جلايكوز امين جلايكان، هم اللي خلينهم بروتوغلايكان ستراكشر. ايش هم الجلايكوز امين جلايكان؟ هذول برانشز كلهم بنسميهم احنا الكربوهيدرات ستراكشر جلايكوز امين جلايكان اللي هم الجاجز. هلا الجاجز هذول مكونين من بوليساكرايد مولكيولز. اوكي. And the component of these polysaccharides إذا اجينا كبرنا هذا الجزء، خليني احكي عن هذا. For example, this is the protein part اللي هو صار هون. And we have this carbohydrate chain, and this is the carbohydrate اللي هو بيمثل glycosamine glycan. And we can see that the heterogeneous structure or heterogeneous component of these carbohydrate structure. Okay. And basically we have here what's called chondroitin sulfate زي ما حكينا قبل شوي chondroitin sulfate protoglycan structure. And that's the reason for having more than one type of protoglycan. It's the difference in the carbohydrate component in these molecules. Okay, so we have protein, and the protein has branches of carbohydrates, and this is just one of these branches, and it will be longer. The point here is just to know the general structure. احنا ما راح نسأل عن التفاصيل. Just to know that we have these basic structures of protoglycans and the difference between the protoglycans and the glycosamine glycan and the glycoproteins. Okay, it's very easy principle or concept.
دكتور
Yes.
هسا بدي اسال، احنا لما حكينا انه في انواع من البروتوغلايكان سبيسيفيك للبون، هذا راح يفيدني كماركر يعني بايش؟
Yes. كيف السؤال؟
هسا لما بنحكي سبيسيفيك تو بون البروتوغلايكان
Yes.
شو راح يفيد؟
Okay, good question. بالclinical applications أو clinical approach, if you are looking for certain disorders in the bone, you can go to detect these proteins in the blood in another way. إذا كان في عندي destruction في البون أو في عندي مشكلة في البون, inflammation or whatever, هذول components راح يتكسروا and they are going to be released in the blood. If you detect these molecules in the blood, it means that the problem is related to the bone structure. وهذا الشيء راح نحكيه بالمحاضرة الثانية, how we diagnose bone disorders. Thank you for asking. Okay. هلا other components اللي هم non-protein components أو in general they are inorganic components, لأن كل organic components most of them are proteins اللي هم minerals. And the major mineral component or inorganic component اللي هو what's known as crystalline hydroxyapatite structure اللي هو عبارة عن الشكل الحجري للبون إنجاز التعبير, اللي هو مكون من calcium والphosphate, and this is the formula of the hydroxyapatite structure. It's very important to remember this formula, as well as the mineralization of or the presence of other minerals in another way, like sodium, magnesium, carbonate, as well as the fluoride. They are very important for the formation of the mineral structure of the bone. Now, 99% of the body calcium is contained in the bone, as you may know. And of course, the bone is a dynamic structure because it is a living tissue. So when we talk about living tissue, so we have what's called turnover of the tissue most of the time. Turnover معناها إنه في عندنا عملية living of new cells or production of new cells, as well as the death of other cells. And this belongs to, and because the bone is a solid structure, a rigid structure, I mean, we have a process of what's called resorption and deposition. Resorption معناها إنه في عندنا عملية تآكل لخلايا أو تركيبة العظام. The other process is called deposition, اللي هي عملية تكوين جديد لمكونات العظم نفسه. Okay, and these two mechanisms are controlled by the presence of these types of cells. The osteoclasts are responsible for the resorption, and the osteoblasts are responsible for the deposition of the bone components or the formation of the bone. So we have formation process and we have kind of degradation process, and these mechanisms are under control. Otherwise, we will develop certain disorders, or we will have certain disorders that are related to the abnormal mechanisms of these cells, or sometimes could be genetic disorders. So let's have an overview of the bone structure, how it looks like, and to differentiate between these types of cells. And here is an example of the osteoblast structure. When they are maturated, I mean, when they are going to be mature, they will be converted to osteocytes, اللي هم البون cells. So the osteoblasts are early stage of the bone cells, اللي هو البون forming cells. And the other type اللي هم الاوستيوكلاست، بنلاحظ انه في فرق شاسع بالتركيب بين الاوستيوبلاست والاوستيوكلاست. بنلاحظ انها multi nucleated cells، هذول النقط عباره عن nucleus or nuclei. And here we have mononuclear cells representing the osteoblast. And this structure represents what's called mesenchyme, as well as the bone matrix on the other side, اللي هو matured bone. And this is the early forming bone. And here we have the newly formed matrix اللي هو mineralized component of the bone اللي هم باللون الفاتح من الطرف اليمين واليسار بالنسبة إلى هاي الصورة. And the major component of the bone as a protein is collagen type 1, which is formed by the osteoblasts اللي هم in the future they are going to be the osteocyte cells اللي هم mature cells. To differentiate between osteoclast and osteoblast, we have to describe their origin as well as their function. As of course, the structure will be included in that. So the osteoclast, as we noticed before, إنه عبارة عن multinucleated cells. This is the first thing. Derived from pluripotent hematopoietic stem cells. So لما بحكي hematopoietic stem cells معناها إنه جايين من البون marrow. And pluripotent هي كلمة تصف الخلايا اللي عندها قدرة إنه تعمل differentiation to other types of cells. هلا الستيم سيلز اللي موجودين في البون مارو اللي هم الهيماتوبيوتيك سيلز هذول responsible for the production of many types of cells. وبالتالي هذا النوع من الستيم سيلز will produce اللي هم البلد سيلز as you know اللي هم very well known to be generated from hematopoietic cells, as well as the osteoclast cells. So pluripotent cells means انه هذول السيلز عندهم potential انه يعملوا differentiation to many types of cells. Okay. لانه في عندنا مرحله بعديها اسمها progenitor cells عندهم قدره اقل للتمايز. بمعنى اخر البلوريبوتنت سيلز هم الخلايا الام الاصليين اللي ممكن يعطونا اي نوع من الخلايا موجود في جسمنا، بينما البروجينيتور سيلز اللي هم مرحله شوي متقدمه ومتميزه بتعطينا عدد محدود من الخلايا المستقبليه من ناحيه التنوع. So basically الاوستيوكلاست عباره عن multinucleated cells generated from the pluripotent hematopoietic stem cells. And they have what's called in their structure ruffled border, which is this structure, just to mention that. This is the ruffled border of the osteoclast cells, and this is the structure of the osteoclast cells, and the ruffled border is this border inside the cell اللي هم الخلايا اللي حكينا عنهم هون، بس هون طبعا مش مفصلين. Okay. Now, the ruffled border vacuole actually or vesicle contains acidic condition and the pH is less than 4 in order to be able to solubilize the hydroxyapatite component in order to do what's called demineralization process. هلا الهيدروكسياباتايت اللي هو cement component of the bone، وهي cement component can be dissolved by acidic environment. So the osteoclasts are able to dissolve or demineralize the bone اللي هو cement component أو الهيدروكسياباتايت components by lowering the pH. And the lowering of the pH is because we have this mechanism of acidity that will be generated by the production of hydrogen ions through the reaction that is very well known. اوكي. هلا وظيفه الاوستيوكلاست زي ما حكينا انه demineralization of the bone under controlled condition, otherwise it will be a pathological phenotype. And these are the osteoblasts that are responsible for the formation of the bone, and one of these cells is starting to be um, one of the osteocyte cells in the bone matrix. Now,
يا دكتور
yes,
بدي أسأل، ممكن نحكي إنه الأوستيوبوروسيس أو البون ويكنس ممكن يكون سببها الأكتيفيشن أو الأوفر أكتيفيشن of the osteoclast؟
sure, sure, yes. Okay. And again, كل مرة بحكي إنه under control. So we have controlling molecules, could be hormonal, that are responsible for this process اللي هو activation or deactivation of other building cells. هلا رح نحكي عنهم هدول. هلا من ناحية molecular structure and simple molecular biology of the process, we know that we have this kind of reaction in our cells اللي هو conjugation of carbon dioxide with water in order to form
دكتور
carbonic acid. Yes.
هلا إذا الأوستيوكلاست فيها أسيدك environment جوا، ليش ما بيأثر عنا إنه يسوي soreness بالبونز؟
لو صبرتي على شوي كنت حكيت لك الجواب.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Now, the acidic condition is controlled by containment of this acidic environment in what's called the ruffled border organelle, let's say. Okay, هلا ruffled border organelle هذا جاي من accumulation of what's called lysosomal structure or lysosomal vesicles. تمام. هلا اللايسوسومز هذول عندهم acidic condition, but it's up to 5 يعني as an acidic condition, and it's going to be more acidic in this kind of cell اللي هو الاوستيوكلاست, because we have this kind of reaction, and on the ruffle border we have ATPase pumping system that is responsible for the transportation of the protons that are generated from this reaction. هلا خلينا نكمل على الرياكشن اللي هو الكربونيك اسيد hydrase reaction or anhydrase reaction or dehydratase reaction اللي هو انزيم مسؤول عن عملية تكوين الكربونيك acid from water and carbon dioxide, and it will generate hydrogen ions, and these hydrogen ions will be transported actively to the ruffled border environment. So the cells are protecting themselves from these acidic conditions or this acidic condition by containing the hydrogen ions in this large vesicle structure, and this large vesicle structure is going to release these acids outside in order to destroy or to demineralize the bone in a very slow motion process. هلا الجزء الآخر اللي هو الكربونات أو البيكربونات will be transported to the blood system through the same mechanism اللي هو replacement with another anion. So that's why these cells are not going to be degraded by the acidic condition due to the containment of these acids or hydrogen ions in this vesicle structure. Okay, so this is the reason for the demineralization of the bone structure by the osteoclast. وهون مش رفل بوردر واحد، يعني نتخيلهم اكثر من وحده لانه الخليه كبيره وفاردة حالها، وهي هيوج سيل يعني جينت سيل، مش مجرد خليه واحده صغيره. هلا مقارنه بالاوستيوكلاست, the osteoblast actually mononuclear cells, they are look like any usual cell that we have in our body, generate from pluripotent mesenchymal cells. Okay, they are different from the other type of pluripotent cells. هلا في عندنا hematopoietic cells المسؤولين عن blood formation, and we have mesenchymal cells اللي هم early embryonic cells in the mesenchyme of the bone. And these cells are in fact responsible for the synthesis of many things. أول شيء اللي هو البروتينز اللي بيكونوا البون زي الكولاجين, as well as growth factors, certain cytokines that are responsible for signaling inside the bone in order to have activation of certain pathways, as well as deposition of the bone components. So they are responsible for the formation of the bone and formation of what's called osteoid. Osteoid اللي هو the first stage of the bone formation, as well as the mineralization. Mineralization اللي هو deposition of the minerals or ions like calcium, phosphate, magnesium, and other types of minerals, but mainly the calcium and phosphate are the major components of the mineralization process, as well as the presence of what's called alkaline phosphatase enzyme in these types of cells. Osteoblasts are rich with what's called alkaline phosphatase enzyme. هون ممكن استخدمه انا هذا كماركر للبون cells, but it's not highly specific. Okay, we could find alkaline phosphatase in other types of tissues, but it's very common or to find alkaline phosphatase in the bone cells or the bone structure. And most probably, if you have high activity of alkaline phosphatase in the blood, it implies that we have certain problem in the bone. And why we have alkaline phosphatase in the osteoblast or bone cells? Because alkaline phosphatase is responsible for the dissociation of the organic phosphate to be inorganic phosphate. ايش يعني الفوسفات بيكون موجود على شكل organic مربوط بالبروتينات, and the alkaline phosphatase is responsible for the removal of this phosphate from these proteins in order to make the mineralization process. And as I mentioned before, collagen type 1 is the predominant type of collagen that will be generated or will be synthesized by the osteoblast cells. Besides the alkaline phosphatase, we have also acidic phosphoproteins, like what's called sialoprotein. And this kind of protein is very important to be synthesized by these types of cells, اللي هم osteoblasts. Why? Because these acidic proteins are, why they are called acidic proteins basically? Because they are rich with acidic amino acids, like the aspartic acid or glutamic acid. Okay, so why these proteins are very important for the bone formation, اللي هم مثال عليهم السيالوبروتين, and mineralization? Because if you have negatively charged nuclei per se, like having these small proteins with these acidic amino acids, and let me draw it as the following in order to simplify it. If you have this protein, and this protein is okay, negatively charged. Okay, now it will be very easy to attract positively charged cations, like the phosphate will be deposited as well, but it will be very important for the deposition or attraction of the positively charged ion. So these proteins, اللي هم acidic proteins, are offering what's called nucleation site because they have these acidic amino acids to start the deposition of the minerals or the deposition of the positive ions in that site of the bone formation. Now, proteoglycans, surprisingly, can work, or glycoproteins can work as inhibitors for the nucleation of this process. The nucleation or formation of the nuclei اللي هو نواة mineralization can be inhibited by proteoglycans and glycoproteins. So that's why it's very important to organize or coordinate the production of these proteins. Okay. Now, because the bone is a living tissue and it's dynamic tissue, we have like 4% of compact bone changing every year. So we have renewal process every year, and it will be more than 20% when we talk about trabecular bone structure. trabecular اللي هو growing bone, more active bone اللي هو جاي على أطراف البون component أو البون tissue. Now, هلا بما إنه الأوستيوبلاست والأوستيوكلاست are responsible for the formation and resorption of the bone, they have to be organized. We have to have organization process or regulation process. And these are the major hormones and factors that can regulate the function of the osteoblasts as well as osteoclasts. And it's very strange to say that the parathyroid hormone as well as 1,25 hydroxycalciferol, who are vitamin D, are responsible for the stimulation of osteoblasts as well as osteoclasts. But at the molecular level, these molecules can stimulate these two different types of cells. At the same time, the inhibitors are different because they are responsible for the blockdown of the function of these cells. So the corticosteroids are responsible for the inhibition of the osteoblasts, while calcitonin as well as estrogens are responsible for the inhibition of the osteoclast. So it's very important to remember these issues when we talk about regulation of the osteoblasts and osteoclasts. Now, if we have certain disorders in the bone formation, we will have such kind of conditions that are related either to deficiency in certain vitamins or deficiency in the enzyme activity, or sometimes malformation of the protein itself, or genetic mutations that are related to that disorder. So, for example, the dwarfism is related as a condition that is related to the bone formation is caused by the deficiency of the growth hormone as a regulatory ligand, while the rickets is developed by the deficiency of vitamin D, as well as osteomalacia is also can be in adult form. I mean لانه هو بيشبه rickets بس هو بالadult form is also associated with vitamin D deficiency. Now, if we have a condition of hyperparathyroidism, we will have excess, of course, parathyroid hormone that will cause bone resorption because it is going to activate the osteoclast much more than the activation of the osteoblast. So we will have more degradation or more resorption of the bone. Other types of diseases are related to certain mutations, not hormonal regulation or vitamin regulation. Okay. كل هذول الأنواع عبارة عن hormone regulation process لأنه في عندنا or unorganized production of these hormones. While the osteogenesis imperfecta as well as osteoporosis زي ما حكى زميلي قبل شوي اللي هم can be related to the activation of the osteoclast as well as deficiency of the basic components of the bone structure اللي هو الكولاجين. زي ما حكينا انه الكولاجين بيمثل 90 او اكثر من 90% من البروتينات الموجوده في البون. So we have these different conditions like osteogenesis imperfecta as well as osteoporosis process that are related to mutations in the genes that are responsible for the collagen formation. And it doesn't mean that we don't have deficiency in other things like the vitamin D in the cases of the osteoporosis or hormonal abnormality. Now we have this kind of rare condition of osteoarthritis. Osteoarthritis as a genetic type is related to collagen mutation, and it has been detected in a small number of population or small number of cases, which means that it's a very rare condition as osteoarthritis that will be related to the gene mutation. We could have other things that are related to the immune system. Now, chondrodysplasias اللي هو نوع من انواع الديزيز اللي related to the cartilage rather than the bone, but we could have we could have it as a condition in the bone formation because it's the early type of cells that will be found with the bone formation. And as you can see here, the collagen type 2 is responsible for the deficiency or for the condition of chondrodysplasia. فهو متعلق بالكارتريج much more than the bone formation. هلا هذول اخر 3 حالات بدي تنتبه على الكوز تبعهم انه it's almost similar cause. We have what's called FGFR 1, 2 and 3 هلا حسب النوع اللي هو هل هو النوع الاول او الثاني او الثالث، وهو اختصار لكلمه fibroblast growth factor receptor. هلا الفايبروبلاست زي اي خليه اخرى موجود على السطح تبعهم ريسبتور، وهذا الريسبتور هو خاص بالجروث فاكتور، عشان هيك هو اسمه growth factor receptor خاص بالفايبروبلاست. So we have different types of these FGFR receptors, and due to the deficiency in each of these types, we have these kinds of conditions. And I'm not so interested in all of these conditions except the last one. I'm very interested in the achondroplasia condition because it's related to the FGFR3 mutation that is responsible for the regulation of the growth. So we'll talk about this in the next few slides, and we'll talk about the abnormalities of the bone formation. So and cartilage formation as well. So these are the conditions that are related to the genetic or metabolic, if you would, disorders that are related to the bone formation. And let's talk about some of these examples specifically with some details, like the osteogenesis imperfecta، واحيانا بيختصروها ب OI اللي هو اختصار ل osteogenesis، حرف ال O وال I من imperfecta. And it's very descriptive to the condition of brittle bones. Brittle bones اللي هو ال fragile bones اللي can be broken easily. Okay, one of the phenotypes that you can see on the patients that with osteogenesis imperfecta is the thin or translucent sclera اللي هو بياض العين بيكون بشكل شفاف بالنسبة لهدول الأشخاص as a condition or as a phenotype for the manifestation of the osteogenesis imperfecta, as well as many other phenotypes like the blue sclera sometimes in certain individuals. And this is an example of the blue sclera due to the thin sclera of these individuals. Now, osteogenesis imperfecta, because it's related to different types of mutations, we have more than 100 mutations that have been recognized and are related to the collagen genes. We are expecting different manifestations, بمعنى آخر different types of osteogenesis imperfecta. وهذول التايبس مقسمين إلى 4 مجموعات رئيسية اللي ممكن يكون mild, extensive, severe, and could be variable. هلا هاي الكلينيكال description is subjective and it depends على clinical assessment of that patient. And they are different again because we have different mutations in these types of collagens, and most probably لأنه بيحكي أكثر من 90% من هذول المutations موجودين either بcollagen type 1 or type 1A2. So we have alpha 1 and alpha 2 in the collagen type 1 that are responsible for the formation of the bone. هلا المشكله بتصير بالميوتيشن هذا بتعتمد على نوع التغيير في هذا في الحامض الاميني الموجود في الالفا تشين. خلينا اذكر بشغله بسيطه مشان بس نفهم شو يعني نوع الحامض الاميني. احنا بنعرف انه الالفا تشين الموجوده في التريبل تشينز اللي حكينا عنهم، بدي اخذ واحد انا فقط، هي مكونه من X if you remember and Y كنا مسمينهم هيك. بلاش اسميهم X Y، خليني اسميهم Okay. I'm sorry. Okay. أنا بسميهم A and B اللي هم الأمينو أسيدز الموجودين في السيكونس. And we have here glycine if you remember. And again we have A, B and glycine. وكلنا بنعرف انه تقريبا ثلث الكولاجين عباره عن جلايسين، لانه هو السبب في عمليه تكوين الالفا تشين ستراكشر in the collagen tripeptides. هلا الفكره هون انه اذا كان التغيير في هذول الاحماض الامينيه it will be less drastic than the change in the glycine. الجلايسين هو اصغر حامض اميني زي ما بنعرف. هلا اذا تغير الجلايسين ب any other type of amino acids، خصوصا انه يكون هذا التايب عباره عن bulky amino acid حجمه كبير, it will destroy the structure of the alpha chain and eventually it will destroy the structure of the collagen, and it will result in what's called pro-collagen suicide. What does that mean? It means that if the collagen structure is abnormal, it's going to be degraded inside the cell, and it's an example of what's known as dominant negative mutation. Dominant negative mutation means that this mutation will cause destruction of that protein and loss of the protein that will be very important for the formation of certain tissues, like the bone in our case. Okay, so the severity of the condition depends on the type of the amino acid that is going to be mutated. فإذا كان الجلايسين هو اللي بصير له mutation وبتبدل بأحماض أمينية أكبر حجما, it will be more severe than any other type of mutations that you could have in osteogenesis imperfecta. And these are some examples of the osteogenesis imperfecta cases, like type 1 in these cases, type 4, type 3 in these conditions, and we could have male, female, because it's not sex-related disorder, it's related to the mutations in the collagen structure, and can be lethal if it's in the early stage of the bone formation. and we could have stillbirth اللي هو
دكتور
يولد. Yes.
بالحالات هاي هل blood vessels are affected or not؟ لأنهم بيحتووا على type 3 collagen، كونه الميوتيشن يعني أثر على type 2 collagen موجودة بالمفاصل أو type 1 موجودة بالبون.
كثير ممتاز. Any tissues that is predominant with any type of these collagens will be affected much more than any other tissue. هلا collagen will not be, sorry, the cartilage will not be affected as much as the bone when we talk about the mutation in the collagen type 1 or type 2 or type 3. يعني بيعتمد على the major protein or major collagen in that tissue.
أيوه
يعني it could affect blood vessels, could affect any other tissues that rely on the presence of the collagen type 1, for example. وبنعرف إن collagen type 1 is present or predominant in much more than one tissue. فكلهم راح يتأثروا for sure لأنه it's genetically inherited.
Yes.
Thank you. هلا another condition that can be related to the solidification of the bone, and it's known as marble bone disease. إنه البون بيكون more solid, more rigid because we have deficiency in the function of the osteoclast rather than hyperactivity of the osteoblast. And it's known as osteopetrosis disease. It's related to the let me say abnormal function of the osteoclast from the point of view of the inhibition. It can be inhibited or it can be downregulated as a function. And this condition is associated with what's called renal tubular acidosis. The whole tubular cells in the renal system, they will be more acidic, as well as a condition that is known as cerebral calcification. Cerebral calcification, the whole accumulation of calcium ions in the nervous system, especially the brain, and you can see it in the X-ray. There will be deposition of the calcium because we don't have efficient activity of the osteoclast cells. And one of the causes of the osteopetrosis disease is a very silly cause from the point of view of the major causes. الديفيشنسي راح تكون بهذول الخلايا بالانزيم المسؤول عن الفورميشن اوف ذا كاربونيك اسيد اللي هو الكربونيك انهيدريز انزيم او كربونيك ديهيدريتيز انزيم. هلا بنعرف انه في عندنا رياكشن اللي هو بيحول الكربون دايوكسيد. هلا هي فيها خطا هون H2O يا جماعه. اوكي في معدل السلايد اللي قبليها لكن لا. هلا بيصل لي ايميلات انه انا متاكد رح يصل لي ايميل هون انه دكتور بالسلايد رقم مش عارف ايش في كذا لازم يكون كذا. هلا بنكون احنا معدلينها بالمحاضره وبالمحاضره اللي بعديها برجع ببعث لي ايميل. ف ما بعرف يعني اللي بيوزع السلايدات وبيعمل التفريغ يحكي لهم عن الملاحظه، لانه احيانا هو رح ينزعج مني لاني مش رح ارد على الايميل بسبب كثره الايميلات، مش لاني بديش ارد. يعني ممكن ارد على مجموعه وانسى مجموعه اخرى. هلا الفكره في هذا الديزيز انه is related to the deficiency in the enzyme that is responsible for the formation of the acid which will be used for the demineralization process. تمام؟ So this enzyme is known as carbonic anhydrase type 2. ليش ركزنا على type 2? Because we have type 1 that is responsible for the same process and it's required for the production of the bicarbonate in order to have buffering system in the blood. Okay, so this type is specific for the function of the osteoclast, while the type 1 is responsible for the buffering system that is doing the same reaction. إذا بتتذكروا. Okay, هلا هذا من ناحية molecular biology يعني it's worth to mention إنه هذا الجين موجود على كروموسوم رقم 8 for example, and we can detect it easy by sequencing. Now, the osteoporosis is as a condition is related to sometimes mutation, sometimes deficiency in certain ligands, and most of the times it's related to the estrogens and cytokines like interleukin 1 and interleukin 6. هذول عبارة عن cytokines زي ما أخذتهم بالمناعة. They are involved in the development of osteoporosis condition, and we will talk about the treatment options that are responsible for the avoidance or avoiding the condition of osteoporosis. هلا الوقت أدركنا. يس
بس قبل سلايدين بالاوستيوبوتروسس هلا حكينا يكون عندنا deficiency فما بنقدر إحنا نصنع الأسيد صح؟
Yes.
طب ليش بده يصير عندنا renal tubular acidosis؟ طب أنا مش قادر أصنع الأسيد.
Yeah. This enzyme is also present over there. So we will have accumulation of acids, okay, inside these tubular cells.
دكتور I think لأنه بطل في تصنيع للبايكربونات بالبون.
مش بالبون.
لأن البايكربونات هو بيس
Exactly. Deficiency in the buffering system over there rather than a production of the acid. Okay. I will discuss it later اللي هو acidosis of the tubular cells of the renal system لأنه associated with احنا أخذنا ببعض acid base balance respiratory system, right?
مظبوط دكتور.
Yeah. If you have a deficiency in the bicarbonate buffering system اللي هو نفس الرياكشن, you will develop such kind of condition as a renal tubular acidosis. لأنه الميكانيزم هناك مش إنه هو عنده رفل سيلز وبيفرز فيها الأسيد. It's working as a buffering system in order to take the acids and release the bicarbonate. Okay, next time we will continue the lecture by talking about the cartilage and covering the اللي هو تقريبا الساعة 12 تكون محاضرتنا لأنه أعتقد حضرت تفوت الآن على المحاضرة اللي باقينا. We have just few, okay, just 4 slides, 5 slides. They are very easy to describe. طيب نشوفكم الساعة 12 إن شاء الله بالمحاضرة الثانية.